I love this quote because I think it describes perfectly how art can be a tool to process difficult emotions. I'm a self-portrait photographer, and I actually often use negative emotions or difficult periods in my life as inspiration for my images. In this video, I want to show you a recent project where I used a camera in combination with mixed media to create artworks that really tell a story. By the way, this is something you can easily recreate at home with inexpensive items like paint or glue. For my project, I used a photo transfer method, which I will show you later on. But let's start with the beginning. The first step was actually taking photos of myself in my home studio. So these are the original shots here. Then I went through all of the photos in Lightroom and chose the ones that I thought were the most fitting for this project. Then the next step was actually printing out the photos so that I could manipulate them with different media. I actually used different papers for this project. The first one was this fine art paper, which is very smooth, has a nice matte surface. And then I also used some glossy photo paper, just normal photo printing paper. So for your project, try to experiment. You can even use things like watercolor paper or even canvas paper. Just make sure it's compatible with your printer type. Okay, and then it was time to actually experiment with different media on different papers. First of all, maybe let me try and explain what I was trying to do in this project. So in these photos, you see me in sort of vulnerable and fragile poses. I have struggled with a lot of injuries over the years, which have created a lot of restrictions for me because I often can't do certain things I love doing, and particularly to do with making art. And so these artworks represent me losing my identity a little bit. It's kind of an interesting question actually, I was thinking, when you suddenly can't do all the things you love, but they are such an important part of you, when all of that falls away, what's actually left? And that's also why in this project I was using a lot of media that sort of destroy the ink or remove the ink from the paper to represent that idea of my identity disappearing. So that's actually a tip I have for you when you're doing a project like this, with mixed media. It's actually really helpful to think about it strategically. So rather than just using whichever media because it looks nice, try to use the mixed media as a sort of stylistic device. So you basically want to think about it beforehand. Which art medium can you use to underscore the message you're trying to convey, or to really emphasize whatever it is you're trying to express through your images? So back to this project. First, I actually started off with water and watercolor. First, I just tried to remove the ink by rubbing it out with a brush and also with a sponge, as you can see here. And I liked the effect, but I wasn't in love with it yet. And of course, doing mixed media art is all about experimenting. So next, I got some charcoal and simply started drawing on the print. I think you could get a really nice effect with this, but in my case, it wasn't really working out and I didn't love how it turned out. So I quickly moved on from the charcoal. And then the next tool I got out is this thing called Mod Podge. You might know it. It's basically like a glue, I think, that's used for lots of arts and crafts projects. And I started brushing it onto the prints. I think this was the glossy photo paper. And I really liked how the gloss or the glue looked on the paper. So I knew I was sort of going in the right direction. And next I started putting two photos together and moving them around a bit to distribute the glue, and then pulling them apart, and it created this really nice spidery texture, which I quite liked. So I took a few photos of that, and that's something I want to recommend you do as well when you do mixed media art. Always take snapshots of your in-between stages and try to do that with a high quality camera, so you can use those photos later on to play around with them in Photoshop, to use them as textures or whatever. And then finally, let's get to the method that I actually ended up using for this project. I discovered it by chance, but I realized it's actually a technique people use all the time, so I could have just looked it up on YouTube. So I had this stuff in my DIY box, which is called PowerTex Fabric Hardener. And I discovered that if I put that on the photo, or on the print, then put that print face down on another paper and rub over it, and then pull off the original print, you get this amazing photo transfer effect. And I really liked it. So I did quite a few of those transfers to really perfect my technique, and I realized that that was really the effect I wanted for this photo shoot, because it perfectly symbolized this vanishing or disappearing message of my photo shoot. So once you're happy with whatever you've been doing, I recommend you let everything dry overnight and then press it under a stack of books or something so that the prints are nice and flat. Next, you probably want to re-photograph the images so you can work with them in Photoshop or process them in a different way. I like to use my camera because the photos end up being very sharp and have a high resolution. Of course, you can also use your mobile phone, or you can even scan the images in. And then once you've done all that, you can actually edit your photos again in Photoshop or another software. I think in my case, I worked on this for one morning or so, just experimenting with different things. I added some textures, I even combined some of the photos to create a sort of double exposure effect, but it didn't really work for this. You could even get some stock photos of specific textures from places like unsplash.com. So these are royalty free, and then you could overlay them onto your Photoshop file and create all kinds of effects. In my case, I overlaid a paint effect for one photo. For another one, I duplicated myself 3 times. And in the last one, I actually only used the original photo of how it came out in the transfer. So these are the final images. Make sure to subscribe and see you in the next video.